All this is Dr. Mobeen Sayed from drbeen.com. With me, I have Coffee Bean and the celebrity doctor, Dr. Corey, with us. Apologies that he got disconnected. He is back with us. Everything is fine. He is safe and he is happy and healthy as well. Looks like he did present that lecture to walls and the lamps and stuff for some minutes. So here we are. Dr. Corey, back to you. Please take it away.
So yeah, I'm going to pick up where I left off an hour ago. So listen, this is what I was saying, is that for months now, I thought I was battling this new and more solidified and perverted system of big science, which has all these barriers. But what I've discovered is that it's not about the data. This is no longer a data argument. The data is unassailable. The data is vast. And so I had to start asking myself, why are people not recognizing that ivermectin is like one of the most effective medicines in any disease model in history? And it was driving me nuts. I thought the world had gone mad until I figured it out. And it was actually through the help of some supporters who found, they sent me some articles, and I learned about this topic, which is called disinformation. And it was first described by the Union of Concerned Scientists, which is an organization that came together about 50 years ago, a little bit more than 50 years ago, in retaliation against the nuclear armament, the armament movement. And what they did is more recently, they codified what's called the disinformation playbook. And what that is, it's tactics used by corporations who seek to delay government action. It's the way that corporations attack science that is inconvenient to their interests. So when the science that's coming out is not good for their income and profit potential, they start to deploy disinformation tactics. And these tactics were first perfected by the tobacco industry over 50 years. And since then, almost every industry and corporation since has borrowed from them. Now, this is not to say that all corporations are evil or that all corporations do this. In fact, it's considered rare. But when it happens, we need to recognize it because it serves contrary to the public interest. And so the 5 tactics, and they give it these kind of cute names, but you guys will all recognize it, right? So the fake, right? Where they will produce a trial, they'll get scientists to produce data, which actually, neutralizes inconvenient data. So when you have conflicting studies, you can always say the science is uncertain, right? Or they go after the scientists who come out. They say they're fraudulent. They do this, or they try to attack their personal histories, or who knows what. Or they say they're not serious, so they're serious or well trained. And then there's the diversion. And the reason why I have that in red is because when I saw the diversion, I said, "Aha, that's what's happening with ivermectin." Is that I'm seeing all of these entities and all of these forces, and all of that they're doing is that they're manufacturing uncertainty about the science of ivermectin where little or none exists. And I finally, it was like a light bulb went off. I said, that's exactly why I'm going nuts here, is because nobody's playing fair. This isn't a fair fight. It's not a data fight. It's not that I'm smarter or less smart than them. It's that they don't care. And then the other tactics they use is they buy credibility through alliances or they manipulate government officials. And if you look at through history of corporate disinformation campaigns, many of them occur in pharma. But, let's just skip over the 50, 70 years of the distortion of science around the harms of tobacco, one of the most toxic substances known in the history of public health, right? To asbestos, right? They tried to actually dismiss the harms of asbestos. Merck, around Vioxx, it was causing heart attacks and even deaths. And they tried to dismiss the inconvenient truths of that science. And then most recently, you guys have probably seen the movie, but the scientists that first started to find that the after effects of playing football as a career was leading to these horrific traumatic brain disorders in later life. And the NFL tried to discredit and dismiss those scientists. And so when there's financial interest, some corporations will sometimes, they will actually act out in these really horrific disinformation tactics. And then Avandia is another one, right? The diabetes drug, and then formaldehyde. And then everybody knows that right now in the United States, we have an epidemic of opiate addicts. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. If you guys can remember pre-COVID, some of the horror shows where morgues in these little towns throughout the country were overflowing with overdose deaths. That was a pharmaceutical company that tried to promote a product as being safe when it wasn't. And they did it with basically alliance with academic institutions. And then obviously even Pfizer has done that with an animal drug that actually caused high arsenic levels. So the list goes on and on. I'm just giving some of these examples. Now let's talk about WHO. So here's the thing about the WHO is that it has this phenomenal reputation, which is largely well-deserved. At least it was deserved. So when it came about in 1948, it had the highest of principles and the highest of goals. And it had some of the most amazing historic public health advances of all time, right? So they eradicated smallpox in 12 years. They nearly eradicated polio. They led the era of the development of these phenomenal antibiotics, which prevented, deaths from sepsis. The HIV pandemic and TB, they were able to distribute and identify highly effective medicines that were low cost and that could be provided to millions of people around the world to eradicate or at least to mitigate those illnesses. But I got to tell you, and this is really important, that was largely done because it was an organization that has its sole focus on public health achievements. The money was totally unrestricted, and it was basically controlled by public health officers who really were able to establish goals and to achieve those aims. The problem is that was then, and this is now. The money for the WHO is now 70% directed donations. They're given by oftentimes private interest or even nonprofits with specific goals that they want the WHO to achieve. So it's no longer, the independent decisions of public health experts, but they're really under the influence of external interest. And it's because of these directed donations. And so in the more recent years, cracks have started to come out in the WHO, and it has been under relentless attack for at least 2 decades, if not more. As they've noticed, independent observers have noticed that corporate funders began to influence their specific and declared interest. Funders started to dictate what their goals are in national clinical research, their tech bio interventions that were in their interest, and they even were managing news and media management. And then a revolving door, right? So if you got a plum job or consultancy at the WHO, you could go on to senior positions in government or pharmaceutical industry and vice versa. And you always had this close network of contacts, and there was a very lucrative career opportunities for many people as they pass through these different spheres of public health. And so it appears to be quite a compromised organization in more recent times, in a marked departure from its history. And that's been well documented. So if you look at how it's been under the influence of the nuclear industry, the accidents at Chernobyl and Fukushima, those reports were largely dismissed and distorted. The true radiation impacts of those accidents have been attempted to be suppressed. And there's clear documentation of that. The most disturbing is the H1N1 in 2009. In the middle of that season, the WHO changed the definition of what it means to be a pandemic. And there's multitudes of evidence to show that the vaccine industry pressured them in order to sell more vaccines. There are numerous allegations of that and lots of evidence to support what happened. And so that's the first example of a global vaccine catastrophe. And then obviously tobacco, and then Ebola seemed to be that they were under an influence of political influences, and which made them reluctant to call a true emergency. And so they're clearly vulnerable to external influences. beyond governments and beyond pharma, even purported nonprofits also have inordinate amount of influence. And in particular, a lot of attention has been drawn to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They are the second biggest funder of the WHO. They've given $4 billion in the last 20 plus years, and they completely operate the ACT Accelerator program and Unitaid, which actually has control over the ivermectin research. And so not only that, but a whistleblower came out months ago saying that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation sought to get sovereign nation status at the WHO. They wanted equal voting power as a sovereign nation of the world. One organization, and essentially maybe one man being given the influence of a sovereign nation, which is it's just appalling to actually contemplate that. But that's the kind of stuff that's happening, and that's how vulnerable they are. And the overwhelming influence is increasingly described. Again, this was an investigative reporter in the New Republic about a month ago who really trailed and showed this network of influence, the vast amount of money that the foundation of Bill Gates and Melinda Gates has, and that they essentially are dictating the global vaccination policy. They have funded Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness, a large part of which is vaccines, and COVAX, which is a partnership of all of them. And so it's essentially, one of the biggest influencers are the Bill and Melinda Gates. And the other problem is one of their essentially guiding principles is that the intellectual property rights of vaccine manufacturers needs to be preserved even in a pandemic. And you're hearing that in the papers now. People are questioning, why would you do this when the world is in crisis and you're trying to preserve the ability for these vaccine manufacturers to make maximal profits? Why can't you share those intellectual property rights so all of those low and middle income countries can make it and we can get out of this? They don't want to do that. And it's egregious and unconscionable in a pandemic. And if you look on April 22nd on the Gavi website, look, this article appears. Lo and behold, out of nowhere, silence comes noise. Why a potential COVID treatment isn't recommended for use. I mean, I showed you the evidence. I showed you how many independent panels think it should be deployed immediately. Yet Gavi, oddly, and I don't know why, they seem to think that it shouldn't be deployed. And then if you look at the influences further, so this is the team lead, the clinical team that dictates the therapies for COVID. And if you look at the LinkedIn page, he shows up. If you refresh the page, Melinda Gates shows up. They seem to be tightly linked. And so you show that all of these influences are just endemic and intrinsic. And let's talk now about the WHO, because if you look at this document, this is a living guideline, and it was published on March 31st. And I got to tell you that finally, this is where I had my aha moment, because while I was watching the European agencies and Netherlands and Belgium and the crazy Canadians who've lost their way, and the US and their dismissals of ivermectin, they never gave you a lot of sort of evidence what they were doing. They just sort of gave you opinions. But what happened here is in this document, you can see plain as day what they did to the evidence base of ivermectin. And let me just take you through that. But it's crazy, this massive evidence base that they were sitting on. There were so many irregularities and so many bizarre actions that they took. It's obvious. All you have to do is read the document carefully. But number one, just look at the membership. They have the chair of guidance support, also a member on the methods committee and the systematic review team. Clearly an irregularity for a guideline review. You don't want someone to have that much influence that would limit or mitigate the objectivity. Further, the most crazy one is they don't have a protocol for what they will consider and won't, which means it allows them to throw out or keep whatever they want, whatever sees fit. And the most dramatic is that the Unitaid search protocol, which is to look for all randomized control trials they could, Unitaid came back from the hunt with a ton of trials And the WHO proceeded to throw a bunch out. They threw out quasi-randomized. They threw out ones where they didn't have a placebo control, even if it was against doxycycline, which hasn't been shown to work. They threw out, even if it showed to be superior to hydroxychloroquine. They just kept throwing it out and throwing it out. We don't even know how many trials they had when they threw out at least up to 7 at the time of their recommendation. And then they also threw out all trials that investigated ivermectin in the prevention of COVID-19. Does anyone know why they would throw out trials investigating ivermectin in the prevention of COVID-19? I know you know, I know, but they basically just say we did not include it. They don't even give it a rationale. I mean, it's not subtle, guys. And then obviously they don't want to hear anything about observational control trials, which is a shame because when you look at the observational control trials, they're totally consistent with the randomized control trials. 50 to 500 patients, same thing, repeated large reductions in important clinical outcomes. The other thing is we know for a fact that the epidemiologic studies showing ivermectin distribution leading to massive decreases in case counts was presented to the WHO group. Nowhere in that document can you find a mention that they were presented or they considered that data. And then when you look at harm, they somehow they whittled it down to just 3 trials, which showed a suggestion that it might be harmful. And they said, you know, this looks harmful. And so what I would like to say is if you read that document, ask yourself as you begin reading the top line, was this written by someone whose intent was objective, or was it written by someone whose sole purpose was to reach a conclusion to not recommend? And I got to tell you, do the latter exercise, because when you do it, you'll see it in the first sentence to the last sentence. Everything is negative, 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 negative. It can't work. There's no mechanisms, haven't been defined. Concentrations can't be reached. Trials are small, poorly designed, not clearly balanced. I mean, it's just a litany of complaints against ivermectin. It's absurd. And then the trial that they show as the highest quality or the lowest risk of bias, which is this JAMA study, actually the entire rest of the world thinks it's the worst and most biased study known to man. And so it's not subtle when you look at that document. I actually think that document's actually helpful because it finally proved to me and taught me what I had suspected, which is that they weren't playing fair. And you just got to look at that document. You can see what they did is absurd and non-scientific. And so this is what they were trying. This is their goal, is they needed to make sure that the quality of the trials could be determined to be very low certainty. If it was anything more, whether it be low or moderate, they would have had to have recommended. Corticosteroids worldwide are based on moderate quality of evidence. Instead, by throwing out this trial and that trial and these trials and those trials, they were left with a tiny little pile. They said, oh, this is so small, it's low certainty, so we can't recommend. The other thing is they had to get around 2 other barriers, which is even if you have very low certainty, if there is evidence of a large magnitude of an effect, for instance, on mortality, they would have to upgrade the quality. Yet, because they whittled it down to so few events, they said that this large magnitude effect is such low quality that there's really not a large magnitude of effect. Meanwhile, all the other independent groups have found it. And then most absurd is that, read the document. They clearly say we could find no dose-response relationship, and they name 5 different outcomes. But notice, in the outcomes where they could find no dose-response relationship, they do not list time to viral clearance. We know from the Unitaid team led by Andy Hill in their public lectures back in January, they were saying that single day versus multi-day were showing profound differences in the impacts on time to viral clearance. They deliberately avoided mention. It's not subtle. It's not subtle. Further, because the quality was so low per their determination, they said it doesn't even need to come to a vote because it's such crap. Why would we vote on crap? And so literally that's what they did. And then most disturbing, you guys may know this, but in France, there's a court case where there's a formal allegation of misconduct against the sponsors of the research team, The Unitaid sponsors, I talked about who sponsors that, right? Who funds that. And they actually wrote the conclusions for the preliminary round analysis. And a formal allegation has been submitted to the University of Liverpool. This is egregious, and it's already been happening in COVID. We've seen external influences on other reports from the WHO. We already know that they are absurdly susceptible for external influences. Let's go over some other disinformation tactics. But before then, here's the last absurdity of the WHO. So they can't seem to recommend ivermectin for COVID. But let's talk about when they recommended ivermectin for scabies and strongyloidiasis. So for scabies, they came to a worldwide recommendation based on 10 randomized controlled trials, 852 patients, even though it wasn't even as good as what it was being compared to, which was permethrin cream. It wasn't even as good as the cream, and yet they came to a worldwide recommendation. For strongyloidiasis, it merited worldwide recommendation, 5 trials, 591 patients. Meanwhile, the BIRD Conference, an independent group of researchers back in March, they compiled 21 RCTs, 2,700 patients, and they said it should be the standard of care worldwide. And look at this slide. Let's compare it to tobacco. So tobacco kills about 500,000 people a year. The use of tobacco saves no one, and it's freely available. Tylenol costs about 500 deaths a year. It saves no one, yet it's recommended despite having no trials to support in COVID. For scabies, it might cause a death a year. It saves no one because it's not a deadly disease, yet it's recommended based on 10 RCTs in 800 patients. And ivermectin, it could save 500,000 people a year, yet it still does not recommend despite 21 RCTs and 2,700 patients. Can anyone see anything that doesn't make sense here? Yes, you can. I know you can. How about this glaring double standard? So ivermectin, the data for ivermectin is just not good enough, right? Let's look at remdesivir. This is from Forbes a couple of months ago. They were like, normally it has to meet standards of safety and efficacy. Yet in October, it was given approval by the FDA based on promising data from small trials with about 1,000 participants. Is this a double standard? Can anyone see that ivermectin is up against a barrier that remdesivir wasn't? And can anyone imagine why? If you're listening, I don't have to say it again. I recommend everybody watch this. This is a phenomenal documentary. It's called Trust Who. I learned a lot of it. A lot of what I'm talking about tonight is informed by that documentary. And I found it truly eye-opening to understand what's happening in a leading international public health agency on planet Earth. And this was the closing scene from the Director General. She was asked a very provocative question at a press conference, and she kind of lost it a little bit. She said, for 70% of our budget, I have to go around the world and beg for money. And when they give us the money, it is highly linked to their preferences, what they like, and it may not be the priority of the WHO. And that says it right there in a nutshell, which is that they're heavily under the influence of external funders. So much so that many employees and scientists have left, and they formed what's called the independent WHO in an attempt to run an organization that is free from such influences. And their main mission is to combat the disinformation around the nuclear industry and the mitigation of the harmful effects around those two disasters. Now, what's important is who could be driving all this? Who would have the incentive to decimate or dismiss or distort the science around ivermectin? Well, the list is really long and the scale of the market is incalculable. If you look at every vaccine manufacturer, the sovereign nations of China and Russia and India, who are trying to curry not only billions of dollars in profits, but geopolitical influences. And then the scale is exponentially increasing. You have booster shot markets where we already have evidence that big pharma is salivating because as we pass from a pandemic to an endemic, they can crank up the prices. There's documentation of pharma executives looking forward to that. And the other thing is all of those novel vaccines rest on what's called an EUA. You can't maintain the EUA if there's a proven therapy, and especially if there's a proven alternative with 40-year track history of safety that could work at preventing getting COVID. And so ivermectin's approval would kneecap a massive industry. And beyond that, all this vaccine hesitancy, if you actually let the common man or woman know that there's an alternative that has a 40-year track record instead of a vaccine that we still don't know the true safety data on, you would actually increase vaccine hesitancy. And there'd be many in public health who don't want that to happen, right? Those who are convinced that a global vaccination policy is a solution, that would be upsetting to them. Again, I am not sharing my opinions on that policy. I'm just putting out that it would present as a threat, right? And some of the big nonprofits also believe in that policy. I'm going to take a real break. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
All good.
I was just scared because I can't see what's out there, and so if otherwise I'm talking to my lamp again. So
we are here. You are talking to about 600 or 700 people right now, and we are listening.
Thank you. So it's me, my lamp, and 700 people.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So let me pick up where I was. Is that beyond the vaccine manufacturers is that you have numerous competing oral antivirals made by Merck and Pfizer, and even Gilead now has an oral antiviral. And I learned from my colleague, Dr. Bean, recently that Merck's oral antiviral, molnupiravir, actually retains one of the key mechanisms of action against the virus that ivermectin has. And if those of you playing along at home, has a pharmaceutical company ever borrowed a mechanism from an old off-patent drug and repurposed it for a new one to make money? Well, if that's never happened, Merck just came up with a new idea. And so they're basically bringing, ivermectin redux at high potential profits. And so there's a lot of competition. There's long-acting antibody products, and there's the monoclonal antibodies, which is a huge market that they're trying to grow. And then your friend and mine, remdesivir. If you saw what happened in Mexico with the drops in hospitalizations and empty hospitals, what happens to the Gilead's remdesivir market? It would disappear. So is anyone feeling me here that ivermectin is not really well liked out there, and that this is why I keep saying hashtag David versus Goliath. David versus Goliath. There are so many entities that want to destroy and make ivermectin disappear, and it's truly remarkable because it's hurting our global health. Now, what are some other tactics? So I showed you how they got to the WHO and all the crazy stuff, which is so plain at WHO. Let me just go through some other stuff that I've been seeing as a student and an observer of the world, as an ivermectin expert. I keep seeing crazy stuff. I keep calling crazy stuff. And now I understand why it's crazy. But here, let's go through it. So number one, colleague of ours, Dr. Ahmed El-Ghazar. He has the largest prospective randomized controlled trial of ivermectin in the world from Benha University, one of the top universities in Egypt. He found in a 400-patient treatment trial, massive reduction in hospitalization rates, 1% versus 22%. Mortality rates, 2 versus 20%. And then in prevention or prophylaxis arms, 2% if you took it regularly. And guess what, guys? Is that published on the front page of New England Journal of Medicine yesterday? It is not. It is not published. And yet, when you see the attacks on the ivermectin evidence base, they keep complaining that they're not peer-reviewed. Can anyone sense a double standard? He's told me that he submitted to Lancet, Nature, Chest, Respirology, and the Journal of Antimicrobial Chemotherapy. Rejected, 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 without even being sent out for peer review in a pandemic, a prospective randomized controlled trial. This is insane. Meanwhile, your friends and mine at JAMA, they feel that they need to publish this randomized controlled trial, which is attacked from around the world as just being a failed trial. So many things went wrong with this trial that you can't even list them on one page. And this is not just because I don't like the result. It's just because it is what it is. It's a terrible trial that failed. And yet JAMA is very happy to publish it, and it's very happy to support the conclusion, which is the conclusion is that it doesn't work, even though all over the study, it's an underpowered trial, and there's about 10 pieces of evidence. And that's only one problem with the trial. But yet, this is what gets published. This, no, this, yes. This, no, this, yes. Not subtle. So much so that there was an open letter. Finally, someone's waking up. People are fighting back. A doctor's letter, over 100 doctors signing, saying that this is unacceptable and unconscionable that you would publish a study that actually calls into question the efficacy of ivermectin based on this flawed study. And so people are really angry. And when I say people, I mean physicians. And I champion this effort, and I think we need more activism like this amongst the physicians. Let's contrast with this. So BMJ, remember April 22nd, the Gavi notice? Well, look, this was get published on April 22nd. This is, again, a 2-page letter showing 100 reasons why you should not believe any evidence supporting ivermectin. Don't believe it. It's all bad. You can't trust it. It's terrible data. It's this, it's that, and it's the other thing. And this is their conclusion. Look how laughable this is. This is the conclusion. We think it should be done based on trustable evidence, right? So that's weird because I usually like untrustable evidence. They think it should be done without conflicts of interest. I've always championed conflicts of interest. You guys realize I'm being sarcastic. What's funny about that statement is that almost all of the evidence base of ivermectin are done by clinician investigators, self-funded, self-directed, with no financial incentives. You cannot find an evidence base with less conflicts of interest than ivermectin. Yet these schmucks want to write an article and the BMJ is happy to publish these guys lecturing the world to watch out for conflicts of interest in regards to ivermectin, an off-patent, widely available drug. This is absurd. And then they go on to remind us that we should have proven safety. 40 years, 4 billion doses. We're not sure of the safety of this one. And then they remind us that we should do patient consent and we should do ethical approval before doing the trials. That's weird. I've never heard of that concept. Again, another novel concept. This is a joke, guys. Again, not subtle. When you see this stuff, laugh, call it out. This is absurd and this is disinformation. I'm just pointing it out to you. Beyond the selective bias, look what's happened when we do pass peer review. So our group and Tess Laurie's group from the UK, and might I mention Tess Laurie's group here, right? They have been writing guidelines and doing Cochrane library reviews and systematic reviews for decades. They're experts at it. They passed peer review and the editors whacked this, retracted it prior to publication. Our group, again, some anonymous external reviewer that the publisher called in also whacked us. 2 different review manuscripts concluding that it would work, they get whacked. So much so, other repurposed drugs. So en masse last week, a number of editors at Frontiers in Pharmacology, a completely compromised series of journals, and their head editor really should go. I wouldn't submit anything while he's there. He's clearly shown himself to be under the influence. His name is Fred Fenter. He's the one who retracted our article. But now multiple other editors say, we will not review papers for anymore. We cannot trust in your objective management of scientific manuscripts. And then now it gets really almost stupid funny. So this FDA posting, you guys have seen this, the picture of the horse. So you should not use ivermectin for COVID-19 because of this horse. Wait, I'm trying to figure, what's the point of the horse? Oh, I know what the point of the horse is. They're telling people don't use animal ivermectin. They provided no specific support for people who got sick. They mentioned that some got sick. Well, from what we heard, there's maybe 4 cases, but no further details. And they also say, don't use it, might be dangerous because it's not FDA approved. We know it's not FDA approved. No pharmaceutical company has sought to apply for FDA approval. And the idea that it might be dangerous after 4 decades and 4 billion doses is laughable. And then the funniest part of this stupid statement is they literally admit in the middle of the statement, the FDA has not reviewed data to support use of ivermectin in COVID-19 patients to treat or to prevent. However, some initial research is underway. So they're telling you don't use it, but we haven't reviewed the data. Please, does anyone find this? To be honest, nothing's funny, but this is so ludicrous that it merits at least a morbid chuckle. And then we're seeing hit jobs in the media. So I did an interview with this AP reporter named Beatrice Dupuis. who stole 25 minutes of my life by interviewing me and my expertise on ivermectin. And I shared with her all of the evidence, all of the trials, and all of the support showing that it's highly effective in prevention and treatment. And this is what she wrote. She basically said that I'm a misinformationist. There's no evidence that it's been proven. And basically the entire argument of this article is that the NIH has not approved it. And the problem and the reason why I have a resentment, well, many reasons why I have a resentment, but if the point of her article was that the NIH hadn't approved it, so it's not proven, why did she need 25 minutes of my time? She could have just written the article without asking me anything and just said, hey, NIH doesn't approve ivermectin. So that's why I demand 25 minutes of my life back. And then you guys see how the system goes, right? So if NIH doesn't approve, the social media also follows suit. So media, social media, Twitter, your Twitter account will be permanently locked if you keep mentioning ivermectin. Your videos will be taken down and Facebook groups will be taken offline. They do not mess around. Just so you guys know, playing along at home in terms of censorship, right? Is discussion of ivermectin harmful? Will it kill people? Does it incite violence, hatred, racism? Is it violent speech or insightful speech? No, it's scientific discussion. It's a deliberation of data, yet they feel that it's so harmful, it must be suppressed. Have we not read history books? Have we forgotten our history and what this country is built on and our understanding and evolution of what free speech is? This is not where you censor. It's insane. And then now we just discovered today on Newswires, we tried to put out a joint press release with Tess Lowry's group in the UK, trying to help guide and support the Indian health authorities as they're trying to navigate a massive humanitarian crisis. And we put out a joint letter with some recommendations and support, and we were told they will not allow our press release to go because it's company policy. You cannot mention ivermectin. Unreal. And then if you guys remember, Merck, very magnanimous to the world. They wanted to support good medical care through this pandemic. So they put out the statement unauthored with no scientific support for it. And they just said, hey, we don't know why you think it works. We can't find any evidence that it works. And we're not even sure it's safe. Can you guys laugh along with me? We have no evidence why you think it would work. By the way, there's 10 years of antiviral experiments showing efficacy of ivermectin against numerous viruses. And then we don't even have to talk about the clinical activity. But this is just a joke. So Merck does not have our best interests at heart. And then again, the competitors, right? Pfizer has an oral pill. Gilead has an oral pill. Even at the beginning, Satoshi Omura, the Nobel Prize-winning discoverer of ivermectin, who worked on this with Merck, the old Merck, not the new Merck. Just like there's an old WHO, there's also an old Merck. Those were the good guys. Those were last century. The new Merck said, no way, we're not going to do any research on ivermectin and COVID. Why would we do that? We can't make a buck. Well, they didn't say that. I'm saying that. And then now you guys, if you're following our social media channels and our organization, I'm actually mired. I'm actually doing work on individual cases where families are distressed because the hospitals and physicians are not following the science and they're appealing to judges. Help, judge. It's a safe medicine. We know it works. There's all this data, and yet the hospitals are blocking us. And so far in the 4 orders where the patients got the ivermectin as a result of the judges, they've all survived. They've all been discharged. And now this week, we have 2 other cases where the hospitals lost. So judges are doctoring now. Now, I'm not a proponent of judges doctoring, but when you have a complete failure of the health system that is beholden and completely captured by these external interests, you know, thank God for the law. I'm sorry that we had to resort to the law, but thank God for them. And this is the unfortunate consequences, which is this was written on a Twitter, and it kind of moved me in a not a good way, but you know, and I totally agree with this gentleman. The problem is that whatever any scientist or expert says and whatever data they present, nobody believes it any longer. Trust in science has been irrevocably broken. That's what happens when science loses its independence and objectivity, bought by the highest bidder. And keep in mind, we're going to post a white paper, which is largely the basis of this talk that I've been writing for weeks. And I think this should be posted and disseminated as an attempt to counteract the disinformation. And just, this is my last appeal, my last slide to all the providers of the world, the medical students, the nurse practitioners, the physician assistants, and the attendings is, come on, man, we're a year into this. And we're offering our patients 6 milligrams of dexamethasone and remdesivir. That's a joke. You know, fire the scientists, fire the desk jockeys, get real doctors, get frontline doctors, and go back to doctoring. Come on, man. Don't rely on their reasoning and the gods of science and knowledge behind enemy lines, or, you know, in rear guard. You know, we're just not relying on our independent critical analysis. Our patients demand that of us. That's what we're supposed to do. It's our core responsibility as a physician. Do the best you can for your patient using the best available evidence you have. Stop being lazy. Stop relying on this flawed guidance from compromised and essentially captured health agencies. And with that, I'm going to stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Corey. This is a sad situation, and actually it may be sad for some of us. It is tragic for many who are actually going through this, do not have the right medication available, and then they're aware that there is something that can work. I still cannot imagine that judges are asking to administer the drug, and I'm sure that folks like you are presenting to them that, hey, it is a safe drug. If I just walk over to my kitchen right now and take this drug, it's safe. And so somebody who is knocking at the death door, offering him just out of compassion,
yes,
to say, man, we're going to try this as well. We're going to try to save you. We're going to try our last, whatever we can. We would not leave any stone unturned. They cannot even bring themselves to this much. I am just shocked.
King Bean, the judges, I've now been able to be privy to what's going on in these courtrooms. The judges are appalled. They are absolutely crushing these hospital lawyers that are coming up with these terrible arguments. And they're really trying to advocate and protect these patients in society. That's how warped our system has become. I mean, that's why I'm asking the doctors, got to speak up, stop being sheep.
Absolutely. And there is one more damage, and this is my, I know we have taken so much time here on the East Coast. The damage is not just in the US at this time. The associations, the organizations like WHO, FDA, CDC, they have influence in the whole world.
Yes.
I talk with my friends outside of this country and I say, administer this drug, it would help you. And they say, your FDA did not approve it.
Every day, all day.
And I become so speechless.
That's the major problem. The problem in society is that our public health agencies are not providing, they're not providing optimal guidance. And without that guidance, our providers are going to be left alone, fearful, at risk, and it's a failure of guidance. And that's why I'm encouraging, again, I don't want to disparage those agencies because there's plenty of good people at those agencies. And there are plenty of well-meaning people at those agencies, but I think more have to speak up and act out. You know, it's clearly not succeeding what they're doing.
Absolutely. So one last question from you. Number one, first of all, thank you very much for your talks, 2 talks, and the talk that you delivered to the lamp as well.
When I get to my lamp.
Yes, the one to the lamp as well. I'm going to say you thank you for that as well. Thank you from Cool Beans as well. And the question is, and I would leave the mic with you and then we will hang up afterwards. What can we do?
So in my paper, which I'll post in the next few days, there are a list of actions that we can do. And when I say we, it's 3 different sets of citizens. You know, the average citizen, yes, you can always write to your congressman, senator, all of that. I don't know if that's enough, but the media has to step up. They have to take back their responsibility, which is an independent assessment of the science. They cannot just, sacrifice that responsibility and just trust what's coming from them. They need to do independent assessments, and they need to balance the two different sides. Whistleblowers have to come out. Humanity has to act. Where you see wrong, say it's wrong. We have whistleblower systems for this reason. I think there has been whistleblowers in COVID. There needs to be more. And I think that those would be really significant opportunities. But the other thing is, when you see misinformation or disinformation, and I lectured about that tonight, call it out wherever you see it. Try to do it with understanding. Maybe some, I get so angry at this point. I'm just so decimated that, a year into this, but I just call it like you see it, and just fight for truth. And I don't know, just have data on your side. Let's follow the science. Let's be scientists. Don't let non-scientific interest enter science.
Thank you very much. And thank you especially to you. So of course, everyone in FSCCC, but thanks to you as well for your effort, for putting yourself continuously on the front. You are the tip of the spear at this time. And all— I
feel it.
right? So I'm sure that there are less who are appreciative. We are all, but there are a lot that are opposing. And so you are that tip of the spear. So I want to thank you especially as well. So thank you. And thank you for being here. Cool Beans, thank you very much for being here as well. Thank you for being here twice. You did not see him the third time where there was an extra lecture as well. And so we would edit this video and then post it once more as well. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.